Dayan said preparations needed to be made immediately, without delay, in case Israel continued suffering massive defeats on the battlefield, telling Golda, quote, "It's possible that time will be of the essence," unquote. Now, several of Golda's advisors were horrified by the suggestion and reportedly shouted at Dayan, telling him, "Moshe, it's too soon to panic." A fascinating new movie called Golda has just been released in the United States and here in Israel. It tells the gripping and deeply moving story of Golda Meir, Israel's first and so far only woman prime minister, as the combined military forces of Egypt and Syria, backed by the Soviet Union, simultaneously launched a surprise invasion of Israel in 1973 on Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. I recently saw an advanced copy of the film over the summer, starring Academy Award-winning actress Helen Mirren as Golda, and I loved it. Here's the trailer.
Four, three, two, one.
Today, the Egyptian and Syrian armies launched an offensive against Israel. Our enemies hoped to surprise the citizens of Israel on Yom Kippur.
Our troops are outnumbered 7-1.
If the Arabs reach Tel Aviv, Israel will be wiped off the map. In my day, they stood for the Prime Minister.
Secretary Kissinger is on the line.
Remember that I am first an American, second I am Secretary of State, and third I am a Jew.
You forget that in Israel we read from right to left.
The American people will pay a high price for supporting Israel.
If we have to, we will fight alone.
Our troops on the canal, they're surrounded.
You rescue these boys.
Might lead to catastrophe.
If the Americans throw us to the dogs, I will not be taken alive.
The Egyptians have fired a cruise missile at Tel Aviv.
Well, I'm not going to get under the table, but don't let me stop you. If the Egyptians defeat us with Soviet weapons, what message does that send to the free world?
The Russians are preparing 11 airborne divisions.
When I was a child in Ukraine, they would beat Jews to death in the street for fun. I'm not that little girl hiding in the cellar.
Oh, by great ascent, oh, by accident.
Do you know how many people died?
All those boys. I will carry that pain to my grave.
Oh, by his lady's command, oh, by
We will keep fighting for a guarantee of life and peace.
shall I say is calm.
What the film does so well is take you inside Golda's world and inside her inner circle, made up entirely of men, as they misread the warning signs of the war that was coming. Directed by Academy Award winner Guy Nativ, himself an Israeli, the film shows us the chain-smoking Golda, gripped by fear and initial indecision, as Israel faces not just a devastating sneak attack, both from the north and the south, but losses so extreme in the early days that she worries her country is facing utter annihilation. And the makeup job is extraordinary. Helen Mirren is truly transformed into modern Israel's least attractive but most heroic woman. But it's Mirren's Oscar-worthy performance that makes the movie work. We see Golda summon the courage not to give up, not to roll over and accept defeat, but rather to push her generals to take enormous risks to turn the tide of the war in Israel's favor. We see her secretly battling cancer, which no Israelis knew about, and she's even going through chemotherapy, even in the darkest hours of the fighting. We see her navigating fierce political crosswinds as the Kremlin gives the Arabs all the support and arms they need to win, while the Nixon White House initially resists giving Israel all the arms we needed to prevent a second Holocaust. What's more, as the tide of the war finally turns in Israel's favor, we see Golda resist tremendous pressure by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, played brilliantly by Liev Schreiber, to force Israel into a premature ceasefire without gaining significant concessions from the Egyptians. Take a look at this scene, which I think is the best in the entire film.
Mr. Secretary?
You are to open a humanitarian corridor to the Third Army, Golda. We cannot allow 30,000 men to die of thirst.
We'll send them water when we've got our prisoners back.
I will try to arrange.
And Sadat agrees to direct talks with Israel. Not the Zionist entity, Israel.
That would be tantamount to recognition.
Yes.
He will never agree to that. The Arab world will turn against him.
If he doesn't, I will order my planes to attack. All those men will die. All of them.
The destruction of the Third Army would force Sadat from power. He'd be hanged in Tahrir Square.
Well, that thought should focus his mind.
And he would be replaced by a Soviet hardliner. You know this as well as I do.
You mean a madman bent on the destruction of Israel?
The Russians are on high alert. They are preparing 11 airborne divisions. Do you understand?
Do you think I don't know that? Let me tell you about the Russians, Henry. When I was a child in Ukraine, at Christmas time, my father would board up the windows of our house
Golda,
to protect us from Cossacks who would get drunk and attack Jews. They would beat Jews to death in the street for fun. My father would hide us in the cellar. And we'd stay silent, hoping the killers would pass us by. My father's face, Henry. I will never forget that look. All he wanted was to protect his children. I am not that little girl hiding in the cellar.
As much as I enjoyed Golda and believe it's an important film and one that you should go see, there are some flaws. One is that it doesn't give nearly enough attention to the fact that Israel actually had a mole deep inside Egyptian President Anwar Sadat's inner circle. His name was Ashraf Marwan. He was codenamed the Angel, and he was the son-in-law of the late Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser. As far better portrayed in a Netflix series, The Angel, for months and at severe risk to his own life, Marwan had been warning the Mossad, Israel's legendary spy agency, that Egypt and Syria were preparing to attack. He was feeding Mossad actual war plans. And when he learned of the actual date and time of the invasion, Marwan passed this on to Israeli intelligence as well. But Golda and her team didn't take the warning seriously enough. After Israel's miraculous victory in the Six-Day War, which was just a few years earlier, they arrogantly thought that Israel was invincible. They thought the Arabs would never try to attack again, but they were wrong. The movie Golda does allude to the existence of the angel, but gives this element short shrift, understating just how much information Marwan was providing the Mossad, again at risk to his own life, and thus understating in the film the magnitude of Golda's failure to get Israel ready. Don't get me wrong, Golda is and always will remain a great hero for how she led Israel to victory after the attack. But if she and her team had mobilized the IDF earlier, based on the Angel's warnings, the invasion may never have happened in the first place. Also somewhat odd, and I'd say disappointing, is that director Guy Nativ gives far too little screen time to the recommendation by Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan in the first disastrous days of the war to prepare the use of nuclear weapons against the Egyptians and the Syrians to save Israel from total destruction. We now know that on October 7th, day 2 of the war, Golda was briefed by her generals on just how horribly things were going, especially in the Golan Heights, during a tense and historic 30-minute meeting. It was in that meeting, we now know, that Dayan urged Golda to order the military to pull Israel's top secret nuclear weapons that to this day Israel still does not officially acknowledge having, out of storage and get them ready for actual use against the enemy. Dayan said preparations needed to be made immediately, without delay, in case Israel continued suffering massive defeats on the battlefield, telling Golda, quote, "It's possible that time will be of the essence," unquote. Now, several of Golda's advisors were horrified by the suggestion and reportedly shouted at Dayan, telling him, "Moshe, it's too soon to panic." In the end, Golda sided against Dayan. She refused to set into motion the nuclear option. In the new film, we see Dayan raise the nuclear option with Golda briefly, and we see her bat it away. But director Nativ doesn't give the moment enough screen time. We don't see the intensity of the argument, and thus we, as viewers, miss much of the drama, the emotion of just how close Israel's legendary defense minister thought his country was to being wiped off the map, and how difficult it must have been for Israel's legendary prime minister to say no to using atomic weapons to save Israel.